Hello and welcome back. I would like to start off with a question. Have you found yourself sitting in a meeting, impatient to say what is on your mind, waiting for your turn to give your opinion? Maybe jotting down a couple ideas, notes, things that you're going over your mind about the best angle to get your point across. In that moment, you are not listening to your colleagues because you are focusing on you and what you are going to say. Welcome to the latest episode of Promoted, Stop Doubting, Start Leading. Today, we're going to explore why listening isn't just a nice to have skill, but it is a leadership superpower. When you are not listening, people notice. That is the bottom line. And a leader I once coached was very confident in her technical expertise, but often felt overwhelmed in meetings when there was maybe some cross-functional teams and some of her peers that she found a little bit intimidating. Instead of listening to understand what they were saying, she focused on defending her position. Eventually, she realized that her inability to listen actively wasn't just affecting her relationships, it was limiting her effectiveness as a leader. And when your mind is elsewhere in a meeting, thinking about an upcoming deadline or the next agenda item, somebody asks you a question and you realize you have no idea what they just said. Raise your hand if this has happened to you. And then you say, what do I do? Do you ask them to repeat the question or do you make up an answer? Okay. That moment is extremely uncomfortable. It's embarrassing. It can be unprofessional, but the impact of not listening goes way beyond personal discomfort because that's when it starts to erode your credibility as a leader. And when your team and your peers see that you're not fully present, it sends a message also that their input isn't valued. I encourage you to see those moments as a wake-up call. And I want to emphasize how critical active listening is when you're looking to build trust and demonstrate your leadership abilities. So before diving in, I do want to clarify the difference also between hearing and listening. So hearing is the passive act. It's passive, okay? We perceive sound, it's biological, and doesn't require any effort or focus. Listening, on the other hand, is active, it's intentional, and it involves not only hearing the words, but understand the meaning, the context, the emotion behind the words. And leadership requires listening because it is a gateway to connection, to trust, and to impact. And that's what I want to explore today: the problems that arise when we don't listen, the benefits of active listening, and some practical tips to help you improve your listening skills. So let's start off by looking at what happens when leaders don't actively listen. So in this scenario, imagine that you're leading a transversal project with teams from different departments, and during the kickoff meeting, a peer raises a concern about the timeline. You're confident that the timeline is going to work, and you dismiss their feedback. Another team member suggests a potential risk to the process, but again, you move forward without fully exploring what they brought to the table. And as the project progresses, there's delays because key issues weren't addressed early on. And the team and your peers also begin to disengage, feeling that their input isn't valued and you missed crucial insights and information that could have prevented the setbacks. So there's now frustration setting in. And this is even more true and more important when you've taken on a new job and you don't know all of the potential consequences to your decisions. And I think that this scenario highlights three very common outcomes of poor listening. First of all is disengagement. When people don't feel heard, they may withhold valuable information, or it could even go beyond that. They'll also not be motivated to propose solutions if problems arise. So disengagement is a huge issue. The second issue is damaged trust. People notice when you're not paying attention to them, when you brush aside their comment and they're starting to think, okay, she doesn't believe in me, she doesn't care what I have to say. And there's some unsettled feelings that work their way into the relationship. Trust is starting to break down. And you can also miss information and important insights. Every person on your team or in a cross-functional project brings a unique perspective and specific information. That is why they are on that team. And when you dismiss them, that can lead to lost opportunities for innovation or improved efficacy. The cost when you are not listening is very high. But the good news is that the benefits of active listening are even greater. Active listening isn't just about hearing words. It's about, like I said earlier, understanding the message and the person behind the message. And when you listen with intention, you make others feel valued and understood. So, 3 major benefits. The first one is building trust. When you're listening, it shows respect. When people feel heard, they're more likely to trust you. And trust is the foundation of strong relationships, whether it's in your team, your peers, or stakeholders. The second benefit to active listening is it reduces conflict. Active listening can diffuse tension. When somebody feels heard, they are less defensive. They're more open to collaboration. It creates a space where people can share, where solutions can emerge, and where we can talk and brainstorm together about solving issues. And the third benefit of active listening is it enhances collaboration. And this is where I really would like to insist upon a very profound but simple mindset shift around active listening. Assume that everyone, in no matter what they're saying, is 10% right. Okay? I'll say that again. Assume that everyone in any conversation you're having, whether it be one-on-one, whether it be maybe you're listening to a political debate, whether it be somebody giving a speech, a lot of times our reaction is to reject that person. But if you go into every single situation assuming that that person is 10% right, it means that even if you don't agree with them, or even if you have a disagreement, there is value in their perspective. So let's go back to that transversal project. If you had taken the time to ask a couple clarifying questions and explore your peers' concern, you might have adjusted the timeline slightly early on to avoid delays and gaining their buy-in. That's also a huge benefit, is gaining buy-in. So listening isn't passive. It is an active behavior that empowers others to bring their best. And that, of course, will end up strengthening your influence. Remember, everybody wants to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. So how do you improve listening skills? So we've covered the problems, we've covered the benefits. How can you become a better listener? I want to give you 4 practical strategies. The first one is listen to understand, not to respond. I'll say that again. Listen to understand what the other person is saying and not to respond. When someone is speaking, resist the urge to formulate your reply. Instead, focus entirely on their words, their body language. Maybe use some reflective language to confirm understanding, like it sounds like your main concern is, or can you tell me more about that? And picking up specific elements in what they're saying will show that you are listening. The second strategy is create space for others to speak. So what I mean by that is do not interrupt and do not multitask. because both of those send a signal that the other person, what they are saying is not important or has no value. So show that you're fully present by maintaining eye contact, asking open-ended questions, because when people feel valued, they will also share more openly. The third strategy is to practice. Practice active listening. And you can start small. Practice active listening in a casual conversation with your friends or your colleagues. And over time, it becomes second nature. But when you start in a situation where there's maybe less pressure or the stakes aren't as high, it's easier sometimes because our image isn't going to be affected, or we're not worried about the image that we're portraying. So practicing daily in situations where there's no stakes, that will make it easier. And the fourth point is I want to come back to what I said earlier about assuming the other person is always 10% right. This is the most powerful shift that you can make. And if you can come away from today's episode with one thing in mind, please let it be that. Even if you disagree, look for the valid point in their perspective. So for example, if a peer questions your project and your approach, instead of dismissing them, instead of getting defensive, instead of taking things personally, which is something women tend to do often, you can simply ask, what part of this plan concerns you the most? Okay, there's something, if they have brought it up, they probably have a valid point somewhere in there. And so with my clients, they practice this skill by forcing themselves to find something to like in what the person that they're having a conversation with is saying. And you can easily practice this too. You may not like what the other person is saying, but you can absolutely find something you can like about the idea. So force yourself to find something and play it back to that person. So it goes something like this. Say someone on your team presented their idea for a new client solution. Your brain, like most people's, goes to all the reasons why it won't work, why it's far-fetched, how much it'll cost. And when you think that and respond that way, it kills the creative juices of your team or of that person and just shuts them down. So you don't have to like the idea, but you can like something in the idea. So when you are listening closely, find one thing you like and respond by saying, what I like about your idea is, and then you tell them what you like, and you be very specific. So you don't have to like the whole idea, but you can like one specific element. And this is absolutely one of the best hacks to also improve any relationship, because deep down, people want to be seen and heard. And this is one way of doing that authentically. So a client I had was also struggling with a colleague. Okay. I coach a lot on conflict with colleagues and navigating those relationships. Okay. So this woman had a very tough time with how this gentleman worked. Their values weren't aligned. They had opposite personalities, opposite working styles. And every single time she had a conversation with him, she felt tension, anxiety, and came out of those meetings extremely frustrated because every single meeting she felt that she was going backwards. So we worked on her listening skills. Specifically, she forced herself to find something she genuinely liked in what that gentleman was saying, rather than immediately rejecting every single one of his ideas. So over time, those tense meetings transformed, as did the relationship. He felt more valued and listened to. There was less tension, and ultimately, collaboration improved. Okay, so you don't have to like the person, but assume that there is something valuable in their ideas. By the way, it also works in your personal relationships, whether it be your spouse, your friends. I guarantee you it will decrease the tension. And I would just like to also propose an exercise that you can do to focus on hearing and listening, because a lot of times our brain now is just on autopilot. And when you force yourself to listen, it becomes a skill that is much easier. So yes, you can do it in a situation, like I mentioned earlier, that is non-judgmental, where the stakes aren't high, but you can also do it alone. So for example, if you are sitting at your desk or you're in your car, maybe sitting in traffic, focus listening for 1 minute to a sound that is very far away from you. Okay, for example, I'm sitting recording this at my desk, in my office, in my home, and outside the wind is howling. I live in southern France. There's a lot of wind. Wind is howling. And I focus my attention for 1 minute on listening to the wind. And then focus your attention for 1 minute on a sound that is close to you, whether that be your breathing, it might be the humming of your computer, it could be a sound maybe of your neighbors. But when you focus your attention and focus your listening to hearing different sounds, that will also greatly improve your listening skills. So I suggest also doing that 2 minutes a day. Very, very powerful. So to wrap up, I want to wrap up with a mindset shift. Listening is leading. When you truly hear what others are saying, you strengthen trust, you build collaboration, and you inspire confidence. Great leaders don't just direct. They create an environment where others feel empowered to contribute. And it all starts with you listening. So as you move throughout your day, reflect on this. How are you showing up as a listener? Are you listening to understand, or are you simply waiting for your turn to speak? By listening with intention, you're not just managing, you are leading. So thanks for tuning in today. Until next time, remember, leadership isn't about doing it all. It's about doing what matters most. Now go be brilliant.